The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So let's dig in. Today, what we're going to talk about is using an RFP for construction specifically. What we're going to discuss with this is going to be a few things. So first up, do a little bit of background of why this is a topic that might be of interest. Number two, we're going to continue our trend here in the last few months of sharing some procurement research with you, some data, some research, some results. So we'll go through those and we'll summarize this with some implications to consider in the current marketplace and point you to some other resources if you are interested for further information on this specific topic. So there we go. Let's start out with the background. So a couple points of background that we want to cover. Number one, there are three types of solicitations, as you are well aware. There's invitation to bid or low bid, sometimes called invitation for bid, IFB, goes by different acronyms, but basically just pure price-based selection. That's one hand. On the other hand is pure qualifications-based selection, where we don't look at cost or fee in any way, shape, or form, just pure qualifications. And then anything that's a combination typically is an RFP. As you know from CPE, we recommend that price be weighted somewhere at 35% maximum or less, so a little bit more weighted towards the qualification side of things than price, but it is a balancing act in there of both price and qualifications. Now, when this comes to the capital projects sector, usually when you're thinking of QBS or qualifications-based selection, that's what the architecture and engineering industry prefers. The A&E industry prefers qualifications-based selection. At the federal level of procurement, that is required to do pure qualifications-based selection for A&E professionals, and most state level agencies follow that. And then as you get further away from the federal government level, things get a little bit more different, but that's the background there. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum is construction. Typically construction, and I'll caveat this here in a moment, but typically it's a low bid game. The lowest responsive and responsible bidder gets the work. If you ever heard of rip and read or hard bid, that's referring to just, it's all about the promised price up front. If you've ever been part of a bid opening, you've probably done that for construction in a bid opening. That's the way that construction often works. So the complete opposite of engineering and design professional services. Now, the other thing to just point out is often low bid for construction is required by law for many public sector agencies if you are at 100% plans and specifications. In other words, the project is fully designed. That's oftentimes a law thing that's changing across the country in some areas. So, and that's not thinking about alternative delivery such as construction manager at risk or design build or some other forms, but we won't get too far in the weeds on that. The other background piece of information to orient us on the typical project life cycle for design and construction is that typically you've got the design phase first, where you design the project, whatever that new thing is, maybe a building, a road, a bridge, a wastewater treatment plant, whatever. Then that design gets put out for bid, and that's when the contractors are coming in bidding for it, and whoever the lowest responsible and responsive contractor is gets to construct or build that project. That's a very, very simplified version, but what you're seeing here is what's the delivery model known as design, bid, build. The name says it all. You design it, then you bid that design, and whoever is the low bidder gets to build it. There's DBB, design, bid, build. When you look at the procurement process in this life cycle here, again, usually design phase, we're selecting design teams up front on a qualifications-based approach, or maybe an RFP depending upon your agency. But traditionally, and what the industry likes to see is QBS. The design team produces 100% construction drawings, so the plans and specifications, those get put out to bid, and typically the lowest bidder is hired for construction. So what we've already covered. Now, Why? Why is low bid so common on the construction side of things? And the reason really is when you zoom in on this 100% set of plans and specifications, the general logic goes something like this. The client says to themselves, well, I'm going to get the same scope no matter who I hire, right? I've got this really detailed scope. It's got all these pictures of what I'm buying. It's got all this, hundreds, if not thousands of pages of specifications of what I'm buying. And whichever contractor I select, so long as they hit some minimums on maybe, bonding capacity and safety records or some basic things like that, whoever I select as the client, that contractor is going to give me exactly what's in those plans and specs. So I might as well hire the cheapest because I'm getting the same result at the end of the day. They're all going to be on the hook to build that 100% set of plans and specs. Now, that's a typical logic. Not saying that it's perfect logic. I mean, we can pick at it a little bit. For example, upon quick reflection, that logic, right? How does that sound to our typical procurement professional ears? In other words, the logic going, the scope is good, so therefore you low bid it. Does that imply that in an RFP where you are looking at qualifications and something beyond a low bid, does that mean that you are lacking a scope? No, we all know that it's important to have a scope in your RFPs. Does it mean that we can change our scope during the proposal process of an RFP? No, doesn't necessarily mean that. But if I go back to our logic here, we're basically saying the scope is set, it's very detailed, so therefore I might as well bid it, right? That's the logic in capital projects. But you go over to RFPs and that doesn't necessarily hold true. So we're going to continue on with this here as well. Yeah, Ben, that's a scary thing, right? Now, there's another distinction to think about here. It's best value qualifications-based selection. So RFPs and QBS, they can be common in alternative delivery. So you're thinking design build, progressive design build, construction manager at risk, and so on. But when you have 100% plans and specs, it's almost always design bid build via low bid, and often required by law. So it all kind of comes back to the fact that, hey, we have 100% scope here, then we may as well just bid it out. And we all know that that's not how we do things on other RFPs, but that is for some reason why we're doing things here on big, large dollar spends capital projects. So there's that. Now, today, with all that background, what we want to cover is what if we did use an RFP? Even if we have 100% plans and specs in construction, what does that look like? I mean, number one, that might be weird for many organizations that they're not even allowed to do that. But luckily, our group at Simplar has had the opportunity to do this with many projects and different client groups. So we tracked it, we have a research study on it, and we're going to share some results with you. What does it look like when we do have 100% plans and specs, but we use an RFP and don't just low bid it out? So here's the setup. If you want the full reference information, we've got the paper cited here. It'll be in the recording, but don't just try to get it from the website. The website will try to charge you. So they try to make money off of their articles. If you want a copy, email it to me. Email me a request or put it in the chat here and we'll try to keep log of that. We can send it to you. Not a big deal. But we're going to cover the key results here with you in this presentation. We had 2 research questions with this study. Number 1, if we do start using an RFP instead of low bid, in construction, what are those selection outcomes? Like who's going to win? And we're going to do a few other things in that procurement process. We're not going to allow the evaluators to look at price while they're evaluating the qualifications-based things. We're going to keep that separate. So there's a few little things going on, basically a 2-envelope cost evaluation there. But yeah, in short, what's going to happen? That's the one side. And then number 2, which evaluation criteria are most effective at differentiating the qualifications of the contractors? So if you are going to start injecting qualifications-based elements to select a construction contractor, what's the best bang for your buck? Can we see some of that in the math as part of the idea here? All right, now to give you a quick overview of how we actually procured these projects, what we did is first we had a written proposal coming back in response to that RFP. So yes, we would get fee or cost. Usually it's a lump sum cost for construction. What's your bid? In other words, the same way that you would normally do a construction procurement. We did want to know past performance about those contractors, and we wanted a technical proposal from them as well. And there are some stipulations there. We had some page limits and standard forms. We made it blind and anonymous to be as fair as possible. So we've done some things like that I won't spend too much time on. Typically, we would shortlist if we got a number of proposals and bidders, and then we would narrow down to interviews. And we would typically interview the top 2 to 4 project roles. So you're thinking a dedicated project manager, construction project manager, a dedicated site superintendent, maybe some key subs, things like that. So I won't get into all the details, but just to give you a sense, right? That's in general what we were doing. If you want more details on that specific procurement approach, I'll point you back to our RFP Doctor archive there. And you go all the way back to January of 2022, more than 2 years ago now, we went through this procurement process in greater detail. It's pretty similar to what was used in this study, and it goes through everything there. So you can check that out for more information. But what happened with these projects? So we had 162 of these that we helped client groups to procure across the US and Canada. We had nearly 700 proposals that came back in response to those 162 projects. So about 4.5 proposals per project on average. The criteria that we used, again, typically it's these 4 major buckets. It's more complex than this. I'm simplifying it for the purpose of the study and the slides here, but it's pretty accurate. Oop, let me get going here. Okay, so lump sum bid costs. So for a project like construction where you do have a very solid scope, literally pictures of everything with thousands of pages of specs, then 25% was the typical weight for cost. That's about a pretty good default for most well-scoped projects, as you can have price be around that amount. Technical proposal is more like a project plan and approach and a risk assessment. There's more detail to it, but that was about 1/3 of the evaluation on average. Past performance, prior experience of the contractor and their team, and then the interviews about another 1/3 as well, is what we typically saw. Okay, so that's the data sets. What did we find? So let's go about this by the research questions. First, just what are the selection outcomes here? The way I'm going to do this is we're going to look at the price on the left-hand side. So we're going to go low bidder here, number 1 best bid price per project, all the way down through the ranks, number 2 best bid price, number 3 best bid price, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, we're going to go across the columns here with best qualified proposal, according to the evaluation team, all the way through the rankings from there. So in other words, we're going to go from cheapest to most expensive from top to bottom on the rows. And from left to right, we're going to go from best to worst on the evaluation scores, just lumping all those qualifications criteria into one overall qualifications rank is what we're doing. So here's the results. And these are all frequencies. So for example, what I mean by that is if you just zero in on this number, 24% of the time, that's what the 24 indicates, 24% of the time or 1/4 of the time, the best qualified contractor was also the lowest bid. So that's like a no-brainer, easy evaluation. So that's the best of all worlds, right? You got the lowest price and the best qualified contractor based upon what we're evaluating here. That's happening 24% of the time. I'm going to broaden that out and say, well, what happens if you get, maybe almost 40% of the time? So 38% of the time, you get the best qualified and within the top 2 qualified and lowest bids. 2/3 of the time, so 67%, if I broaden this out, you get top 2 in both qualifications and top 2 lowest bidders. Again, 1/4 of the time, 24%, you're getting the number 1 lowest bidder is also the top qualified. But then you add up all these frequencies, and in this scenario, 2/3 of the time, you're going to get top 2 in both costs and bid, so cost and qualifications based criteria. I'm lingering on this one. Jake may have taken note of this number and making your CEU questions. So hint, hints. Just sitting here doing this here for a moment. Thanks, Victor. Got me there with the hint. Okay, now clearing that out. Let's continue on, add up some totals here. If you just look at the best qualified down that column, you add it all up, more than half the time, the best qualified contractor was getting selected. You go top the top row here, almost half the time, the lowest bidder was getting selected. So once again, you're seeing a pretty good balance here between qualifications and bidders. Let Len know we don't have a minimum score there. We do have some shortlisting prior to interviews, perhaps, but we do that based upon competitive range, not by presetting that competitive range. We can talk about that further afterwards if you'd like. But no, we don't typically preset a threshold there. We take a look at where the competitive range of the actual competition is on a project-by-project basis is what we'd recommend as a best practice there, but very good question. All right, now, One thing that might be interesting to compare is, well, how do these results where we have 100% construction documents and we're doing an RFP, how does that compare with when you use an RFP for architectural and engineering professional services? And the surprising answer is this is pretty similar. Those of you who attended last month, our March RFP Doctor, we did a very similar study, but purely for A&E services. And we went through those results. When you go through those results, I've got A&E on the left. I have the slide that we just shared of construction on the right. And you read across there, I mean, they're almost identical numbers, which is interesting because we've already covered the fact that the selection outcomes here, you know, they're almost identical between A&E and construction. We covered the fact that traditionally speaking, these two professions have opposite procurement traditions, where construction is low bid, A&E is pure qualifications-based selection. They're literally opposites of each other and how the public sector traditionally procures these services. Yet, when we use an RFP, the results are pretty similar across both of them. You would say they're indistinguishable. So, you know, that's a head scratcher. What's going on there? It's almost like construction is not a commodity. And in fact, the procurement results are somewhat similar to a professional service like design services. Hang on here. I'm seeing, Susie, your question. When you say 100%, do you include permitting? You run the RFP with unpermitted drawings? Ooh, good question. That depends on a project-by-project basis. I would say the majority, because it's the public sector agency releasing these, is already in collaboration with some of the permitting that is required, but not in every case. I can think of a few. I mean, these are all projects that our group helped procure. So I'm trying to think back in my memory banks of the ones I was involved with. They were largely permitted or well down the process on behalf of the public sector buyer, if I can remember correctly. Good question. But mainly I'm talking about the scope itself. Okay. A couple other things with these selection results here, just so you get a sense of how the selected contractor stacked up in these projects related to the competition, right, to the market rates. Our selected bidder was usually cheaper than market rates, much better in their technical proposal, a little better in their past performance, and a little bit better in their interviews than the average competitor. Okay, research question 2. We also want to look at this. Which criteria are most effective at differentiating the proposals of competing contractors? This is the variation and evaluation scores that we saw. So we did a bunch of nerdy statistics on this. It's in the research paper itself, but basically breaks out to interviews and technical proposal had a higher variance in scoring, whereas past performance and lump sum bid costs were lower, relatively lower. They're not, none of them are 0, right? There's a variance in all of them. But in other words, we are seeing qualifications-based distinctions amongst competing contractors for the same type of work. So in summary, construction is not a commodity, even if you have 100% construction documents. I'm going to do another Victor hint here. The answer to another question might be there. And then, you know, why? Well, the selection results were pretty similar to A&E professional services. If you use low bid, another thing to keep up in your mind is that you are signing yourself up to not get the best contractor, best qualified contractor, nearly 80% of the time. Remember, only 24% of the time. We had the best qualified contractor was also the lowest bidder. Well, the flip side of that is the other 76% of the time, the low bidder is not the best qualified. So if you enjoy signing yourself up for not the best qualified 3/4 of the time, then keep doing low bid because you are being successful and not getting the best qualified in a low bid methodology. So congrats on that, public sector. Now, you also can get a pretty solid balance of best value by using an RFP. We saw that in the results. A few other things to think about here for you. So in terms of how busy the capital project sector is, one thing that we take a look at here is you can try to predict how much work is coming, because many of you are noticing, especially we've recently had some chats with friends across various municipalities in, say, Texas that are outside of some of the major city hubs, and they're finding it harder to get bidders for their projects. It's just such a busy market out there. So this is a momentum index from Dodge, which tracks projects that are in planning. It's a 1-year-ish leading indicator of projects that are going to go out to bid. My slide is wrong. It's not actually the April. What I'm showing you here is the February update. I'm about to reveal the April one to you. But what this is showing you is like we've had very jagged readings on projects that are in design right now and entering planning right now that'll eventually go out to bid. It's been kind of choppy. So we've been telling people for months that either this trend will go up or it's going to go down. We're going to figure it out in the next few months. And I've been telling people that since October, and it still was choppy. But we finally had our first major move, and it was this month. It dropped straight down like a rock, 8-9% in April here. So we're dropping down. And specifically where you're seeing a lot of projects not entering planning at the same rate is in institutional buildings. So you're talking vertical sector, public sector. That's where you're seeing a major drop off in projects being planned. So maybe that could mean a year from now, you have more bidders on vertical sector jobs. We'll see. That's one indicator here. We'll see if this trend continues or if it was an aberration of a month, but that was a big, big drop. The Architectural Billings Index, that's architects. Are they billing more or are they billing less? They keep billing less month over month over month, which means by proxy, fewer projects in design means fewer projects going out to bid later. So maybe it becomes more of a buyer's market in the future. This is about a 1-year leading indicator as well. Construction executives have low confidence that the market is going to grow. They're predicting a shrinking market going forward, according to ENR, Engineering News Record. So in other words, what I'm telling you is there are many indicators that certain sectors of the industry are slowing down. Others are still hot. I didn't show you data on this, but manufacturing, industrial, transportation are still heating up and growing. Transportation is poised to grow significantly here. But some of those other institutional vertical sectors have some trends of cooling. And if that's the case, and you have projects like that that are coming out to bid later on, a slowing market can in fact be a great time for a client organization to start making some changes. You have more leverage there, right? So if you want to start going towards a non-low bid approach and start considering qualifications, well, as you enter a slowing market, you'll have a greater potential to try to draw the best project team individuals towards your job because people won't be stretched quite as thin when it's not as busy. So just a little thing to be, sticking in the back of our brains to keep an eye out on the pulse for projects that are entering the pipeline and coming up in a year or two.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.